On our wedding night, my gorgeous new bride was already sitting at the head of the bed, slowly and calmly unhooking her earrings. "Hubby," she purred, "do you remember back in third grade when you played the hero and saved a damsel in distress?" I slapped my thigh, totally hyped. "How did you know about that? Wait, don't tell me. You were the little girl getting bullied." "No," she whispered, the corners of her lips curving into a chilling little smile. Her slender fingers grabbed my tie, slowly twisting it around her knuckles, loop by loop. "I was the person you pinned to the dirt and punched 3 times. The smile instantly vanished from my face. 6 years of dating, a multi-million-dollar wedding gift, and a massive ceremony. From start to finish, this whole thing was a trap she carefully set just for me. Now, take a guess," she murmured. "Is this bedroom door locked? Let's rewind a bit." Inside our presidential suite, the blackout curtains were pulled tight. Fiery red rose petals were scattered across the floor, and the air was thick with the heavy, sweet scent of expensive champagne. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my tie pulled loose and hanging in a messy knot. My mind kept replaying that perfect moment at the altar when she said, "I do." I had thought to myself, "Luke, the absolute smartest thing you've ever done in your life was marry Chloe." She stepped slowly out of the bathroom, rocking a stunning silk nightgown, her long hair loosely pinned up at the back of her head. Glistening drops of water slid down her neck, landing perfectly between her delicate collarbones. My Adam's apple bobbed. I was captivated. But she didn't even look at me. She just walked over, sat on the bed, and started taking off her earrings. Her movements were gentle and meticulous, like she was dismantling a highly delicate explosive. "Hubby? Yeah, baby?" I answered instantly. "Do you remember back in third grade when you stepped up to save a girl in distress?" The question completely blindsided me. My brain raced, flashing right back to my childhood. Outside the elementary school gate, a little girl in pigtails was crouched in the dirt, crying her eyes out. Standing right over her was a kid who was half a head taller, looking totally fierce and intimidating. Back then, without a single second thought, I charged forward and threw 3 fast punches. Back in the day, I was a total superhero fighting for justice. "Of course I remember," I laughed, slapping my leg hard. "Were you that little girl getting bullied?" "Wait a second." I turned to look at my new wife. She was staring quietly right back at me, her eyes curved into crescents, a faint, breathtakingly beautiful smile playing on her lips. "Could it really be you? Did you track me down after all these years just to repay the favor? Is this some legendary romance?" "No," she softly cut me off. Her fingertips wrapped my tie around her hand, loop after loop. Her grip wasn't too loose or too tight, just firm enough to press dangerously against my collarbone. "I was the person you pinned to the ground and punched 3 times. The room went completely dead and silent. That sweet, romantic floral scent suddenly felt incredibly suffocating. "Wait, what did you say?" "Luke," she pronounced my full name with absolute ice. "The person you mistook for a school bully was me." My mind totally short-circuited. Memories exploded in my brain. The face of the tough kid I had shoved into the dirt. The neat short hair, the fierce, rebellious fire in those eyes, glaring furiously up at me, even while covered in mud. I desperately tried to mash that angry kid's face together with the stunning beauty sitting right in front of me. And then it clicked. That slight, chilling smirk on her lips right now was exactly how she gnashed her teeth in pure rage back then. "Exactly," she whispered. "When we bumped into each other freshman year, you thought it was destiny." She tilted her head. "In reality, I staked you out for 3 days straight just to engineer that perfect accidental meeting." A cold sweat broke out uncontrollably across my back. "That first movie you asked me to? I hacked the booking and chose those seats in advance. I knew you were terrified of the dark, but too proud to admit it." An icy chill crept up my spine and spread across my shoulders. "We dated for 6 years, and I only said yes after your 3rd proposal. It was never because your love finally won me over." She leaned in, inch by inch, until her face was almost touching my nose. "It was simply because the cash you offered the first 2 times didn't hit my target." My entire body went rigid. I practically stopped breathing. She raised her hand, her manicured nail lightly tapping my forehead. "And now that the ink is dry on our marriage license, the vows are said, and your whole family claims me as their daughter-in-law." She slowly turned her head, shooting a dark look at our heavy, soundproof bedroom door. "The door is already locked shut. I am so incredibly screwed. My romantic wedding night is about to become the anniversary of my murder." Um, Chloe? Babe? I stammered. Sure. She beamed with a dangerously bright smile, patting the mattress. Kneel down first. I obediently dropped to the floor, my knees hitting the thick carpet with a heavy, pathetic thud. She nodded with terrifying satisfaction, pulled a crisp piece of paper from the nightstand drawer, unfolded it painfully slowly, and shoved it right into my hand. 4 massive words were printed dead center at the top. Debt. Repayment. List. Item 1. Mental anguish compensation for being punched exactly 3 times. Item 2. Mud pit laundry fees. Fully adjusted for 20 years of inflation. Item 3. Reputational damage compensation for being ruthlessly mocked in elementary school and suffering complete social humiliation. There were 7 or 8 more items listed below in dense, terrifying detail, all written in her neat, elegant handwriting. You can take your time paying it back. She pressed the deadly paper flat against my chest. No need to rush. We have the rest of our entire lives ahead of us. And plenty of time. I forced out a heavily strained, incredibly awkward smile. Honey, you're not actually being serious, right? She lowered her head and coldly pondered for a moment. Tonight, you sleep on the floor. Just the floor. Absolutely no getting onto the bed tonight. As soon as the brutal words left her mouth, she just clicked off the lights, pulled up the warm blanket, and completely turned her back to me, leaving me staring at nothing but her slender outline. I knelt there in the pitch black quietly for a few seconds before slowly lying down on the absolutely freezing floor. The scattered wedding petals clung to my bare back, sending miserable waves of chills straight through my entire body. Luke, you are utterly, hopelessly finished. Half an hour later, a soft, warm blanket was suddenly tossed down from the high bed, landing smack dab right square on my face. Don't catch a cold. Her muffled voice floated through the heavy darkness. If you get sick, how are you going to slowly pay off your massive debt? I clutched the lifesaver blanket tightly, my cold nose instantly filling with the clean, familiar scent of her usual fabric softener. What was this even supposed to be? Just a little bit of humanitarian mercy right before my scheduled execution? The hardwood floor was as brutally hard as an iron plate, and I miserably tossed and turned all night long without sleeping a single wink. Just as early dawn was finally breaking, a sharp, stabbing ache in my lower back forced me wide awake. Blinking open my tired eyes, the very first thing that came into clear view was a pair of delicate slippers. Looking slowly up from the slippers, my terrifying wife Chloe had already changed into some casual morning clothes. Her long, beautiful hair was tied into a low ponytail, and a simple, cute apron was tightly tied around her slender waist. She was casually holding a hot, steaming drink. Seeing that I was finally awake, she calmly set the cup down on the glass coffee table and turned right around to head straight back into the kitchen. I painfully sat up and buttoned my wrinkled shirt, finally getting a crystal-clear view of the delicious items waiting on the table. A perfect cup of freshly brewed coffee sat on a saucer, accompanied by a golden plate of warm waffles generously drizzled with honey and a small, aesthetic bowl of neatly sliced plump strawberries. I leaned in cautiously close and took a deep sniff. The coffee was the exact dark roast flavor I always drank, and the sugar level was perfectly, intentionally cut right in half. She actually remembered all of my exact preferences. No, wait, she had spent 6 whole years intentionally tracking and completely figuring me out. So naturally, the mastermind knew every single little detail. This was clearly a psychological tactic perfectly meant to keep me right under her thumb. I nervously picked up the hot coffee and took a very cautious sip, my anxious eyes glued strictly to the kitchen the entire time. Inside, she was skillfully stir-frying ingredients like a pro. The rhythmic clinking of the metal spatula was accompanied by warm wisps of rising cooking smoke. Right then, my cell phone suddenly vibrated, and a voice message from my best buddy Brandon instantly popped up on the screen. Bro, happy wedding day. How was last night? I lowered my terrified voice to a whisper and replied, Brandon, I honestly don't think I'm going to make it through this month. What's going on? He asked. Do you remember back in 3rd grade, when I beat up a girl? The other end of the line went dead silent for 2 whole seconds. Of course I remember. Of course I remember that. That short-haired tomboy, you knocked her straight into a filthy mud pit with one single punch. Why bring her up all of a sudden? Chloe, was that exact girl. The line fell into an even longer, horrifyingly dead silence. What did you just say? Your gorgeous wife. The woman everyone called the absolute campus beauty. The one you spent 2 full years desperately chasing before she finally said yes? She said our accidental romantic encounter back in freshman year was actually something she completely arranged after stalking me for 3 whole days. Brandon literally gasped loudly. His voice was completely panicked. Bro, you need to pack your bags and run right now. I subconsciously turned my fearful head back toward the kitchen. Chloe was already walking out, holding a plate of fried eggs cooked to a golden, appetizing perfection on both sides, with slightly crispy edges. Exactly how I liked them. She gently, almost sweetly, placed the plate right in front of me. Eat up. Think of it as your last meal. She sat directly across from me without a single expression, resting her pretty chin on both hands and quietly staring right through me. Eat more. We have plenty of intense physical labor to do this afternoon. I quickly panicked, picked up a huge piece of waffle, and stuffed it straight into my mouth, chewing and swallowing as rapidly as humanly possible. I'd better fill my stomach first. A truly wise man knows exactly when to yield to an absolute monster. My phone was still actively connected to the call, with Brandon desperately sending one voice message after another on the other end. I simply swallowed hard and pretended not to hear a thing. She elegantly picked up a red strawberry with her fork and popped it into her mouth, her intense, calculating eyes remaining completely fixed on my face from start to finish, never straying for even a single second. All right, Luke, here are your newly assigned tasks for today. She pulled out her smartphone, opened the memo app, and agonizingly slowly read the list aloud. First, replace all the light fixtures in our new home with 30,000 K lights. Task number 2, build that brand new flower rack out on the balcony. Third, scrub your entire college social media history and delete every single photo you have with other girls. And fourth, give me a foot massage lasting no less than 40 minutes. Seriously, what does any of this have to do with getting her revenge? Apparently, she calls it atonement through hard labor. She set her phone down. Her face was dead serious, like she was presiding over some high-stakes corporate board meeting. Back in the day, you hit me 3 times. I didn't strike back right then and there. I just decided to let the interest slowly accumulate first. I just stared at her in dead silence. I noticed her fingernails. They were trimmed flawlessly, round and neat, painted with this almost transparent, nude polish. Looking at her now, I couldn't help but flash back to that little girl dragging herself out of the mud pit all those years ago, glaring up at me with those fierce, impossibly stubborn eyes, dirt and grime completely caked under her nails. Deep in my chest, this crazy, indescribably heavy wave of emotion suddenly crashed over me. What are you spacing out for? Finish eating and get to work. She stood up to clear the table. And then, as she walked past me, she gently patted the back of my head. It didn't hurt at all. It was just a super light, surprisingly soft touch. You know what? Fine. Worst case scenario, I'll just spend the rest of my life paying off my massive debt as her very own free manual laborer. That afternoon, I tackled that flower rack. I kept twisting screws non-stop until my hands were completely raw and covered in blood blisters. When she strolled past the balcony, her footsteps paused for just a split second. 5 minutes later, a box of Band-Aids and a bottle of antiseptic magically appeared on the coffee table. Neither of us said a single word about who put them there. The very next day, my buddy Brandon rushed over to my apartment in an absolute panic. The second I cracked the door open, he poked his head inside, wildly scanning the place, looking like a guy terrified of stepping on a landmine. Is Chloe home? Yeah, she's in the kitchen, I muttered. He instantly reached out, grabbed my arm tight, dragged me into the corner of the balcony, and frantically whispered, Bro, I didn't sleep a single wink last night. Your insomnia isn't my problem, I shot back. No, listen, he hissed. I've been wrecking my brain trying to remember exactly what went down back in the day. Dude, you did way more than just punch her 3 times back then. You didn't just hit her. My face instantly froze. After you shoved her into the mud and she finally managed to drag herself out, you pushed her right back in. No way. There's no way, I mumbled. Yes, way, he insisted. You literally pointed right at her face, called her ugly, and screamed at her to stop bullying people. The air between us instantly flatlined into dead silence. A single bird started chirping outside the balcony, making the whole vibe feel painfully, excruciatingly awkward. The entire class watched it go down, Brandon whispered. She sat in that mud pit for a really long time. She just sat there, drenched in mud, for so long. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, but man, she refused to shed even a single tear. "And what happened after that?" I asked, my voice tight. "She transferred to another school, and nobody ever saw her again." I gripped the balcony railing so hard my knuckles turned stark white. I hadn't just hit her. I had brutally, entirely humiliated her right in front of everyone. Suddenly, the sharp click of footsteps echoed from the living room. "Brandon's here." Chloe's voice cut through the air, icy, calm, completely unreadable. "Make yourself at home. Grab some water from the coffee table if you're thirsty." Brandon slowly turned around to face her, his Adam's apple bobbing hard as he gulped in sheer panic. Throughout college, he'd seen Chloe countless times. Heck, at our graduation ceremony, he was the guy taking all our group pictures. But the way he stared at her right now, it was like locking eyes with a terrifying stranger. "Hey, hey, Chloe." Chloe just gave him a faint, chilling nod, sat elegantly on the sofa, crossed her legs, and casually started scrolling through her phone, exuding this overwhelmingly icy, boss-level aura. Brandon perched on the edge of the opposite sofa, barely daring to let his weight settle, shooting me desperate SOS signals with his eyes. I completely pretended not to notice. "Brandon," Chloe suddenly called out, her eyes never even leaving her screen. "You were there that day too, weren't you?" Brandon's face instantly drained of all color. I was just watching from the sidelines. I swear I didn't join in." "Oh?" she murmured. "I clearly remember you cheering him on, screaming at him to beat me up harder." Brandon practically vibrated with terror, almost sliding straight onto the floor. "Relax. I won't go after the little accomplice," she said dryly. Chloe casually swiped to the next page on her screen. "You just need to write a 300-word reflection essay on that entire incident and hand it in to me. By next week." "Wait, sister-in-law. Are you being serious right now?" She finally raised her eyes, shooting him a dead-cold glare. Brandon immediately snapped to attention, sitting bolt upright. "Serious! I am taking this absolutely seriously. I will literally go home and start writing it right now." Meanwhile, I just sat off to the side, holding a mouthful of water I was entirely too terrified to swallow. When Brandon finally left, I walked him out to the elevator. He looked like his soul had just left his body, slumping against the wall and panting for dear life. "Bro, to be completely real with you right now, don't you think Chloe actually treats you way too well?" I couldn't help but freeze in my tracks. "What?" "Just now, when we were sitting out there in the living room, the water she set on the coffee table for me was the absolute perfect temperature. And dude, it was in the exact same cup I used the last time I came over." He paused for a second. "Also, earlier when you had your head down to drink water and weren't paying attention, I happened to catch the way Chloe was looking at you." "What kind of look?" I asked. He scratched his head, struggling to find the right words. Man, it definitely didn't look like she was staring at an enemy. The elevator doors slowly slid open, and Brandon stepped inside. Right before the doors shut, he poked his head back out and urged, "Bro, don't just sit around panicking. Pay attention and actually look at her." I stood frozen in the lobby, watching the floor numbers tick up one by one, my head spinning with a million different thoughts. When I got back to the apartment, Chloe was out on the balcony, tending to her plants. On the wooden rack I had just built for her, a whole row of tiny potted plants sat perfectly arranged. They were all her favorite succulents. "Chloe, don't say my name so affectionately," she snapped. "Call me Miss Chloe." I sighed. "All right, Miss Chloe. What would you like to eat tonight?" The watering can in her hand stopped for a split second, but she didn't turn around. "What can you even make?" "Honestly, all I can make is instant ramen." "Fine. Ramen it is," she replied. Half an hour later, I carried 2 steaming bowls over to the dining table. She stared down at her bowl, the corner of her mouth twitching in obvious disgust. But surprisingly, she sat down without a word, grabbed her chopsticks, and started transferring every single piece of sliced sausage from her bowl into mine. "Do you not like them?" I asked. "I just think the way you cut them looks completely ugly." I looked down at the perfectly arranged slices sitting in my broth. Every single piece was perfectly uniform, neat, and thick. If she thought they were so ugly, why was she giving all the good stuff to me? As her so-called revenge dragged into its second week, I finally started noticing a pattern to Chloe's madness. Her punishments for me basically fell into 3 specific tiers. Tier 1, petty errands, and small tasks. Even in the pouring rain, she'd force me to walk across 8 different streets just to buy a cake from her favorite bakery. and it had to be a strawberry mille-feuille. Absolutely no substitutions for strawberry mousse allowed under any circumstances. Every single time, I'd drag myself back home, completely drenched and looking pathetic. She'd snatch the cake box, pop it open for inspection, and then she would always slice off a huge piece and slide it over to me. "You actually got the right one. Consider this your reward." Tier 2, ridiculous house rules that explicitly banned me from the couch, forcing me to sit obediently on the floor. But there was always this one subtle detail. Whenever I was stuck sitting on the hard floor, she'd pretend to casually kick a plush sofa cushion right next to me. A kick, sure, but with just the right amount of force to make it land perfectly within my reach. And then there was Tier 3, minor physical punishments. She'd catch me completely off guard with a light pinch on the arm, or a soft tap on my forehead with the TV remote. But the force? It was always incredibly gentle, exactly like a cat batting at you paws out, but claws totally pulled back. She never actually wanted to hurt anyone. But what finally brought my racing thoughts to a dead stop wasn't just these little daily quirks. This afternoon, while I was sorting through our monthly expenses, one crazy item on the receipt completely caught my eye. It was a men's luxury wristwatch, a Patek Philippe no less. I rubbed my eyes and checked the receipt 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. 2 months ago, walking past a mall window, I had stared at that exact same watch. Chloe was deep in a phone call back then, so I was absolutely certain she hadn't noticed at all. "Item number 6 on your debt settlement list," she declared, not even bothering to look up from her magazine. "Compensation for the immense physical and mental toll you've caused me over the past 20 years. Compensation for a mental toll. Yet she bought me an incredibly expensive watch instead? Consider this watch a reward," she had said. "Rewarding me for what, exactly?" "Consider it your dumb luck." She casually flipped a page of her magazine. "Lucky that you get to be the main target of me settling my past scores." I stood there holding the heavy, elegant watch box, just turning it over and over in my hands for a long time. If this was what she called revenge, then honestly, I really hope she holds this grudge against us for the rest of our lives. Later that night, I was at the kitchen sink doing the dishes when a kitchen knife suddenly slipped. The blade sliced right across my fingertip, and dark beads of blood instantly pooled up. The cut wasn't too deep, but the sharp, stinging pain made me wince. "Ah!" I gasped, quickly twisting the faucet to rinse the cut under the cold water. Suddenly, frantic footsteps rushed up right behind me. Chloe flew into the kitchen from the living room. She grabbed my wrist with a desperate grip, leaning in super close to inspect the damage. Her delicate fingertips were visibly trembling. "I am always telling you to be careful with sharp tools." But her harsh tone suddenly cracked, and her words caught in her throat. She slowly raised her eyes to meet mine, a messy, overwhelming swirl of emotions flashing in her gaze. A split second later, she took a deep, shaky breath to steady herself, and directly pulled my bleeding finger between her lips. The faint, metallic taste of blood must have filled her mouth. She frowned slightly, using the soft tip of her tongue to gently press against the cut. I completely froze on the spot. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. After a few agonizing seconds, she finally let go of my hand, spun around, and frantically yanked open a drawer to hunt for a Band-Aid. She bumped against the drawer edge twice in her sheer panic. Once the protective bandage was securely wrapped, her trembling hands finally steadied. She lowered her head, carefully pressing down the edges for a perfect fit. "You're always so totally careless," she murmured. Her voice was barely a whisper, soft and gentle. With that, she turned and walked away, her steps way slower than her frantic dash from earlier. I just leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at my bandaged finger. It honestly felt like the soft warmth of her lips was still lingering right on my fingertip. Was Chloe's relentless revenge actually fueled by hatred, or was there a totally different feeling buried deep down? Fast forward to Saturday evening, my family hosted a massive dinner. Mom made it crystal clear over the phone that this whole banquet was thrown just for Chloe. Ever since we tied the knot, Mom hyped up her daughter-in-law a dozen times a day, barely giving me a second thought. My car finally rolled up to the old ancestral estate. Chloe stared into the tiny sun visor mirror, carefully touching up her lipstick. I gripped the steering wheel and glanced over at her. "Hey, when we head inside, you aren't going to tell my folks about our past drama, right?" She snapped her lipstick shut, flashing the absolute sweetest, most gentle smile. She looked pure, dignified, and elegant a total 180 from how she usually treated me. Yeah, right. What do you think? I grumbled to myself. She was a total wild card. Honestly, she was capable of just about anything. The second we stepped inside, Mom practically dragged Chloe to the sofa, completely thrilled. She was bustling around, serving up tea and snacks, waiting on her hand and foot. I just stood off to the side by myself, looking like a total third wheel. "Oh, Chloe, honey, you look like you've lost weight," Mom fussed, gently squeezing her wrist with a look of pure heartbreak. "Is Luke not taking good care of you at home?" "Mom, he treats me perfectly," Chloe replied in the softest voice. I forced a bitter smile. Yeah, right. Just yesterday, she made me kneel on a freaking washboard to beg for mercy. If he ever dares to mistreat you, you just let me know. I'll teach him a lesson he won't forget. He won't. Chloe lowered her eyes, her eyelashes fluttering like an angel. He always gives in to whatever I want. Hearing that made my skin crawl. My dad called me into his study. I took a seat, and he poured a cup of green tea, sliding it right in front of me. "Make sure you manage your marriage properly from now on." "Dad, I know what I'm doing." "Chloe is an incredibly sharp and reliable woman," my dad said, looking dead serious. "From the way she looks at you, I can see a really deep affection hidden right beneath the surface." "What kind of look?" "She might nitpick and find fault with you, but her eyes follow your every move. She never looks away, not even for a single second." I just held my teacup, staying completely quiet. Over dinner, Mom dragged out this ancient, yellowing photo album, absolutely insisting on showing Chloe my embarrassing childhood pics. "Look at this one. Third grade school assembly. Luke was up on stage getting an award for doing something incredibly brave. The chopsticks in my hand completely stopped moving, and Chloe totally froze up too. The kid in the photo was wearing a school uniform, sporting a huge red flower on his chest, and grinning wide with 2 missing front teeth. Back then, he stood up at the school gate to help someone. He chased off a bunch of nasty bullies, and even got a public commendation from the whole school. Mom's voice was just bursting with pride. The corner of Chloe's mouth twitched just a tiny bit, a super subtle shift that only I could catch. Under the table, she brutally pinched my thigh. I nearly choked and spat out the pork rib I was eating. "Mom, come on. There's zero need to flip through all these ancient photos," I choked out, forcing a painful smile. "Oh, hush. These are amazing stories from your past, and it's the perfect time for Chloe to see them. It really is quite remarkable." Chloe's voice sounded impossibly sweet, gentle, and perfectly refined. She slowly turned to look at me, her eyes curving up into dangerous little crescents. Her lips parted slightly as she silently mouthed the terrifying words, "I'll settle the score with you the second we get home." I swallowed my food with a heavy gulp, practically choking on it. Once the dinner wrapped up, Mom walked with Chloe out into the courtyard for a stroll. I stayed behind in the living room to clean up the plates. Staring out through the glass window, I saw the two of them walking side by side under the rose trellis. A truly relaxed, genuine smile hung on Chloe's face. It wasn't that mocking smirk she always wore around me, nor the ice-cold mask she used for strangers. It was like she had completely dropped her guard, showing a hint of sweet, childlike innocence. Mom leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Chatting casually, Chloe bowed her head just a bit, lightly brushing the back of her hand against her nose. In that exact moment, she looked like a girl who had been starved of family warmth her entire life, finally wrapped in true tenderness. My fingers unconsciously dug into the edge of the serving tray. "Chloe, you went through absolute hell just to get close to me. What on earth are you truly searching for?" Fast forward to Monday, right after our management meeting ended, the vice president cornered me in the hallway. "Mr. Luke, about the River City buyout. The partners just suddenly dropped all their original demands. We were deadlocked for 2 whole months. How the hell could they just let it go out of nowhere?" "It is definitely weird," the VP said, nervously adjusting his glasses. "Their legal team claimed it was due to an internal change, but they completely refused to elaborate." I headed straight back to my office to dig through the files. Our rival in this deal was a massive real estate giant, backed by some serious heavyweight players. For 2 agonizing months, they had been drooling over the development rights for the commercial land under my name, using every dirty trick in the book to squeeze us, firing off threatening legal letters, aggressively snatching up our trademarks, and even secretly messing with our permit approvals. But now, they just tucked their tails and walked away. I immediately called in the head of legal. He sounded super hesitant. "Mr. Luke, we did a little digging. It looks like a major player stepped in before we could. Did you find out who it was? I pressed. We can't confirm anything yet, but right before they backed out, they got a letter signed by Lumen Capital. Lumen Capital. That was the investment firm Chloe built from the ground up. She started that business back in her junior year of college, kicking things off with a measly $12,000 in seed money, and skyrocketing the company's valuation to over $100 million. Honestly, I rarely poked my nose into her work, and she never exactly volunteered the details. What exactly did that letter say? The legal head just shook his head with a sigh. They are keeping their mouths completely shut. They only said they were officially dropping the whole thing. I slumped back into my office chair, just staring blankly at the ceiling for what felt like forever. When I got home that evening, Chloe was chilling on the couch, casually flipping through a massive industry report. I hung up my coat and sat right across from her. The River City buyout. That was you who stepped in, wasn't it? She didn't even pause, turning the page. I don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about, Chloe. I pressed. She finally, slowly raised her eyes. I really don't get what you mean, she brushed off. Lumen Capital getting involved? There is no way that's just a coincidence. Her fingers froze at the edge of the paper for a split second. But then she just kept right on reading. It's purely a stroke of luck, Luke. They choked us out for 2 straight months, yet one single letter from you made them wave the white flag. How the hell could that be a coincidence? Chloe snapped the report shut and tossed it onto the coffee table, leaning back with her arms crossed sharply over her chest. Luke, get this straight. Listen to me very carefully. You are under my protection. My heart instantly skipped a beat. But you're also the guy I'm coming after to collect old debts from. She tilted her chin up arrogantly, her face totally cold and aloof. Aside from me, no one else is allowed to mess with you. The entire room went dead silent. Nothing but the ticking of the wall clock. She stood up, brushed past me, grabbed her report, and gently smacked it against my forehead. Stop letting random losers walk all over you. It makes me look bad. Her footsteps slowly faded away, clicking shut behind the bedroom door. I just sat there alone in the living room for a really long time. A strange wave of warmth hit my chest, sparking feelings I had seriously never felt before. Chloe's twisted version of revenge was just impossible to figure out. The next day, Brandon texted me, asking to meet up. Inside a private room at the coffee shop, sitting right across from Brandon was a woman in her early 30s. She wore a sharp navy blue coat and had this super graceful, composed vibe. The woman introduced herself as Violet. The name didn't ring a single bell until Brandon dropped a few words that made my brain completely short-circuit. She was the little girl who was crying at the school gates all those years ago. You must be Luke. It has been a really long time. So good to see you again, Violet said, warmly reaching out her hand. I shook it, my palm practically drenched in cold sweat. Miss Violet, about what went down back then. Did you always think? Did you think Chloe was bullying me? She gave this soft, knowing smile. I gave a nervous nod, but then she slowly shook her head. That day, my tiny kitten had climbed way up into the big tree by the school gate, and it just refused to come down. I was so panicked that I totally broke down crying. She gently stirred her coffee, letting the memory sink in. Chloe just happened to walk by. Without saying a single word, she climbed right up that tree to save my cat. Holding the kitten, she shimmied down to a lower branch. I was terrified she'd slip and get hurt, so I was yelling up at her to be careful. My hands clenched into tight fists under the table. Right at that exact moment, you came sprinting onto the scene, Violet said, looking at me calmly. You only saw me bawling my eyes out and saw Chloe glaring down with her usual icy face, so you naturally assumed she was bullying me. You charged in like a raging bull. By then, she had just jumped down from the tree, still clutching my little kitten. You marched right up to her, snatched the cat out of her arms, and violently shoved her back. She fell straight into the mud. The startled kitten took that fleeting chance to scramble away. She staggered up and shot a fierce glare right at you, only for you to brutally shove her down again. Then you punched her 3 times in a row. The heating inside the coffee shop was cranking out plenty of warmth, yet my entire body instantly broke out in a freezing cold sweat. She never even fought back, Violet recounted slowly, her words heavy. She just shielded her face with one arm while desperately clutching the kitten with the other, refusing to let it go. She was absolutely terrified it would run off and get lost again. Hearing that, I squeezed my eyes shut, a crushing weight pressing against my chest. The deeply buried, fragmented memories of the past finally pieced themselves completely together. It turned out, there was no such thing as me playing the righteous hero back then. Instead, without even bothering to know the truth of the situation, I had ruthlessly beaten up a fiercely kind-hearted girl who was simply trying to rescue a stray animal. After word of the fight got out, Brandon, sitting quietly off to the side, finally spoke up to ask about the grim aftermath. Everyone in the entire school heard about the incident, but the vicious rumor spread that Chloe was a ruthless bully who had finally been taught a lesson by a righteous, brave boy. Not a single person listened to her desperate explanation, and the teachers never even gave her the slightest chance to defend herself against the accusations. Unable to endure remaining at that school, she eventually transferred away. Violet quietly picked up her backpack, preparing to leave. Just before walking out the door, she cast a long look back at me. Luke. After she transferred, I actually went to visit her. Her school uniform, completely stained with dirty, muddy water, was still hanging out on the balcony, totally unwashed. As she just stood there, staring blankly at that ruined uniform, she only said one single thing to me. My heart hammered. What? What did she say? She said, "That boy really hits hard." Violet smiled faintly at the memory, pushed open the cafe door, and vanished into the street. Inside the dim private room, Brandon just looked at me, hesitating to speak multiple times before ultimately only letting out a heavy, defeated sigh. Bro, I don't think... I cut him off. There's no need to say anything more. I abruptly stood up, the sharp friction between the heavy table and the floor making a harsh, ear-piercing scraping sound. On the lonely drive back, I abruptly pulled the car over to the curb and killed the engine. I rested my forehead heavily against the steering wheel, my tense fingers trembling completely uncontrollably. A sickening wave of sour, crushing discomfort welled up deep in my stomach, my dry throat feeling exactly as if it were being repeatedly scraped raw by coarse, gritty sandpaper. The brutal reality was, I was never a shining hero saving people. Instead, I was the villain, the cruel wrongdoer who harmed an innocent girl for absolutely no reason at all. For 20 agonizingly long years, she had silently carried that heavy injustice entirely alone, with not a single person ever stepping up to clear her tainted name. Walking alone through all the bitter wind and rain along the way, she had painfully transformed, step by difficult step, into the fierce, guarded woman she was today. Deliberately drawing near to me, silently investigating my life, attentively understanding my every flaw, all while harboring deep, hidden feelings she never dared to show. I snapped my eyes open abruptly, Brandon's haunting words loudly echoing on a loop inside my mind. The way she looks at you is nothing like the way someone looks at a bitter enemy. And then, what my own father had once said hit me. She may pick on you constantly, but she can never seem to take her eyes off you. The Band-Aid she had so carefully applied back then. The morning coffee brewed perfectly to the exact temperature of my very specific preference. Emotional scene after scene kept furiously surfacing before my eyes like the warm blanket she quietly draped over me late that freezing night, and those stubbornly firm words declaring that only she was allowed to protect me. They circled repeatedly, endlessly, in my racing mind. I finally drove back home, my tense fingertips still completely unable to stop trembling slightly. Yet, despite the shaking, my hands gripped the steering wheel and held the direction fiercely. I arrived, pushing open the front door to finally return home. Chloe was casually curled up on the soft sofa, absent-mindedly watching television. I quietly changed into my slippers, walked over with slow, deliberate steps, and sat down right beside her. She lazily turned her head and gave me a faint, evaluating glance, her familiar tone carrying just a little bit of playful teasing. "Look at that absolutely terrible complexion of yours. Seriously, what happened?" My eyes burned with raw, overwhelming emotion. Without a word, I reached out directly and took her soft palm warmly into mine. Her delicate fingertips were shockingly cool. Her body subconsciously recoiled a tiny bit at the sudden contact. Yet, in the end, she didn't actually pull her hand away from my grasp. 10 full seconds of heavy silence flowed quietly between us. "Luke, you're really not yourself today." I swallowed hard. "It's nothing." I gently flipped her small hand over, laying it softly palm up in my lap. A very faint, jagged scar lay right across the center of her palm, looking exactly like a thin, fragile silver line. Without looking incredibly closely, it was completely imperceptible to anyone else. But staring at it now, I understood everything so painfully clearly in my aching heart. It was the permanent mark left behind when she bravely jumped from that tree 20 years ago and gripped the rough, unforgiving bark. My thumb gently pressed against the faded scar, slowly and reverently brushing over it. Chloe's steady breathing suddenly lost its rhythm, and just a heartbeat later, she yanked her hand back violently, as if she'd been burned. "Bizarre," she muttered, her defensive voice carrying a noticeable hint of sudden hoarseness. She quickly stood up and walked briskly, almost fleeing, into the bedroom. The sound of her closing the door was surprisingly soft, yet that crisp, definitive click of the lock engaging echoed exceptionally clear in the quiet apartment. I just sat there entirely alone in the dim living room, the comforting residual warmth of her skin still lingering like a ghost on my palm. Outside the window, city traffic sped past, casting fleeting light and shifting shadows across the ceiling. Slowly but surely, that suffocating panic in my heart from earlier completely dissipated into thin air, leaving only 1,000 tumbling, determined thoughts behind in its wake. Ever since discovering the agonizing truth of our past, I immediately began to silently put my protective actions into practice. I dedicated myself to attentively, endlessly making up for my brutal past mistakes and blind ignorance. I was no longer limiting myself to checking off some formal written debt repayment list. Instead, I was finally following my true, raw feelings, actively writing my very own deeply personal chapter of atonement. Every single morning, I got up early, freshly ground the coffee beans, and placed the steaming mug right by her bedside. After carefully testing and tweaking for several days, I finally figured out that 105 degrees Fahrenheit was the absolutely ideal temperature for her morning coffee. Still beautifully drowsy from a deep sleep, she reached out, took the cup, and closed her eyes for a gentle sip. "Perfect temperature," she murmured softly. I stood frozen by the doorframe. My hands unconsciously gripped the hem of my shirt, choking back the endless words swirling in my heart. Now wasn't the right time to confess everything. Around noon, I made a special trip to the market 3 blocks away to grab some fresh ingredients. My cooking skills used to be completely pathetic. On a normal day, I practically lived off instant noodles just to survive. But after a whole week of grinding through tutorials, I finally mastered her childhood favorite, soy braised eggplant. The sauce had to be on the sweeter side, and the eggplant needed to be deep fried in sizzling oil first. Right before taking it off the stove, you had to hit it with a splash of sweet and sour vinegar to really make the flavors pop. I learned every single one of these hyper-specific flavor profiles directly from Violet. Growing up ordinary, Chloe used to eat this cozy, home-style dish all by herself at a rundown little diner right outside her school. At dinner time, I placed the steaming plate on the table. Chloe glanced up, hesitating for what felt like forever before finally picking up her chopsticks. "Where on earth did you learn to make this?" she asked. "I just looked it up online," I replied smoothly. She stared right through me for a second, then picked up a piece and chewed it slowly. "The texture is totally off, and it's way too sweet. I'll dial back the sugar next time," I offered. She didn't say another word, but her chopsticks didn't stop moving until the entire plate was completely wiped clean. "The flavor still isn't really my thing," she muttered defensively. She set down her bowl, wearing a painfully obvious mask of pure indifference. I just couldn't stand seeing the ingredients go to waste, that's all. Watching her desperately try to play it cool, I couldn't help but crack a smile. Honestly, over the past week, I had tried to open up and confess my true feelings so many times. On Tuesday, while she was drowning in work, I knocked and walked in. The words were burning on my tongue. "Chloe, I need to tell you something. I'm in the middle of something. Just leave me alone for now," she snapped. Then on Thursday, we were on the balcony, side by side, tending to the plants. The golden sunset softened her sharp features, making her look incredibly beautiful. "Chloe, there's something I've always meant to tell you." She bent over to trim the rose bushes, letting stray petals flutter down onto my shoulder. "Help me check the 3rd shelf of the plant stand. The screws feel a little loose," she deflected. Finally, on Saturday night, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and sat right by her bed. "There are some things deep in my heart that I really need to talk to you about." She put her phone down and looked at me. Her face was totally calm, but her knuckles were turning stark white from gripping the phone so hard. Deep down, she was clearly hiding a massive amount of panic. "What exactly do you want to say about what happened back in elementary school?" she challenged. Well, but before I could even finish my sentence, her alarm abruptly went off. It was exactly 10:30 p.m., her strict, non-negotiable bedtime. She reached over, killed the alarm, and practically buried herself in the blankets. "It's getting really late. Let's just talk tomorrow," she mumbled. The lights clicked off, and absolute darkness instantly swallowed the room. After what felt like ages, the sound of her endlessly tossing and turning reached my ears. Her breathing was totally erratic. She wasn't even close to falling asleep. I knew perfectly well that she was dodging the subject on purpose. Every single time I tried to bring up our buried past, she flinched. She would instinctively pull back and completely shut down. I stared blindly up at the ceiling, pressing the back of my hand hard against my chest. Just what on earth are you so terrified of? Was she scared I'd see right through her tough act and realize her so-called revenge was just a desperate cover for her true feeling? Or was she terrified that once the truth finally came out, she wouldn't have a single excuse left to stay by my side? But then, a massive turning point crashed into us without a single warning. On Sunday afternoon, the doorbell violently rang out. I pulled the door open to see who it was. A girl with a messy bun stood there in an oversized hoodie, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and a lollipop casually hanging from her mouth. She blinked her bright eyes. "You've got to be Luke, right? And you are?" I asked. "I'm Jenny, Chloe's childhood bestie." The girl casually strolled right past me, padding straight into the living room in just her socks. Hearing all the sudden commotion, Chloe immediately poked her head out from the kitchen. The second she realized who it was, her cool facade completely shattered, revealing a super rare flash of pure panic. "Why are you suddenly here?" Chloe gasped. "I missed you, so I made a special trip out here and figured I'd help screen this guy for you while I'm at it," Jenny chirped. Jenny flopped aggressively right onto the sofa, making herself completely at home. "Wow, he actually looks way more handsome in person than in those photos," she blurted out. "Photos? What photos?" I asked, totally confused. Chloe practically sprinted over to her best friend's side. She viciously nudged Jenny's ribs as a silent warning, but Jenny either totally missed the hint or was ignoring it on purpose and just kept right on blabbing. "Didn't you tell me before that he looked way better in real life than in your secret photo album?" "Jenny," Chloe growled, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly dark pitch. "Okay, fine, my lips are completely sealed." Jenny threw her hands up in mock surrender, tossing a playful smirk my way. I just quietly poured the tea and took a seat. As the three of us settled into a casual chat, Jenny's bright, outgoing energy naturally took over the room. She bounced effortlessly from topic to topic, shifting from daily office drama to the latest binge-worthy TV shows, keeping the vibe incredibly light and breezy. But throughout the whole thing, Chloe was completely on edge, hyper-focused on her best friend's every word. She looked absolutely terrified that Jenny might casually blurt out her deepest, hidden feelings. On the surface, I was just looking down, casually scrolling through my phone, but in reality, I was hanging on to every single word they said. After talking for what felt like hours, Jenny finally paused to take a sip of her tea, letting out a deep, nostalgic sigh. "In the blink of an eye, you two are actually married. Time really flies, huh? Man, if you count from middle school, those feelings began way back then." Chloe's fingers suddenly tightened in a death grip around her water glass. "What? What exactly do you mean by that?" "I mean, ever since 8th grade, you've..." Chloe frantically jumped up to shut her up, but she was just one step too late. The words had already tumbled out. "You've been head over heels in love with him since middle school." A dead, heavy silence instantly crashed down over the living room. Even the birds outside completely stopped chirping. I slowly raised my eyes, only to find Chloe standing absolutely frozen beside the sofa, clutching that glass in a vice grip, her fingernails violently digging into her own palm. There wasn't a single trace of anger on her face anymore, just pure, unadulterated panic. She was completely exposed, with nowhere left to hide. I had only seen her in a state like this once before, years ago, when I accidentally sliced my finger open back in middle school. Keeping my tone low and gentle, I watched her. She desperately avoided my gaze. She's just talking total nonsense." "I am not talking nonsense," Jenny shot back, her eyes going wide in defense. "Back in 8th grade, I saw it with my own 2 eyes at my house. You were obsessing over his class photo." Chloe lunged forward, immediately slapping a hand over her best friend's mouth. But Jenny fiercely fought back, trying her hardest to speak, her muffled words aggressively pushing through. "You even secretly kissed that picture." The air in the room completely, utterly froze. Chloe's ears instantly ignited into a deep, fiery red. The intense flush rapidly spread all the way down her neck, painting even her delicate collarbones a burning rosy hue. In all our 6 years together, I had never, ever seen her look so profoundly bashful and flustered. Luke, her voice trembled slightly, barely a whisper. Please, just pretend you didn't hear what she just said. Let's just pretend I didn't hear anything. Before I could even react, she grabbed Jenny, practically dragging her as she dashed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind them so hard the very walls shook. I just sat there alone in the living room, staring blankly at the water sloshing inside my cup, my chaotic, surging emotions refusing to settle down for a very long time. Her feelings for me had actually taken root as early as middle school. The agonizing years she had spent secretly loving me started a whole 6 years earlier than our supposed chance encounter in college. That completely destroyed the timeline of when she allegedly started stalking me for revenge. Half an hour later, Chloe finally kicked Jenny out of the bedroom. As she left, Jenny silently mouthed the words to me, making it crystal clear the absolute truth was finally out. Right before she walked out the door, Jenny suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Lowering her voice, she gave me a grim warning. She really hasn't had an easy life all these years. Her playful, bubbly vibe from earlier was completely dead, instantly replaced by a dead serious, intensely earnest expression. She spent years shedding blood, sweat, and tears to become the woman she is today. Do you really, truly think all of that was just for some petty revenge? Without even waiting for my answer, Jenny turned on her heel and walked out. I slowly closed the front door, leaning my tired back heavily against the wall as I stared up at the ceiling. Everyone, literally everyone, assumed she was purely driven by bitter hatred and revenge. Hell, maybe even she believed that at one point. But the deep, hidden love burning inside her heart that had been completely predestined from the very, very beginning. That night, Chloe hid out in the bedroom the entire time, refusing to take even a single step outside. And I just sat there in the dark living room, quietly losing myself in thought for hours. Approaching 11 that night, my brain finally snapped back to reality, remembering she'd complained earlier about her favorite hand cream being totally out of stock. I figured I'd go online and try to track down a supplier for her. I walked into the study, noticing the desk was wiped down and meticulously clean. With all her complex industry books and heavy files perfectly arranged, something caught my eye tucked away into the side of a document rack. Was a battered, old, dark blue notebook. The edges of the cover were severely worn and deeply yellowed from years of aging. I seriously hadn't intended to go snooping or touch her private documents, but as I reached past them, the notebook accidentally slipped, tumbling open onto the floor. Instantly, the incredibly familiar handwriting on the page locked my eyes in place. The script was beautifully unique, the ending strokes carrying this very distinct, elegant little curve. I immediately knew it was Chloe's handwriting. I slowly bent down to pick it up, but my eyes instantly locked onto the opening words. Words all about me, about Luke. My rational mind screamed at me that I absolutely shouldn't snoop, but an overwhelming surge of desperate curiosity kept my eyes involuntarily glued to the ink on that page. I found myself silently flipping through it, page after agonizing page. 8th grade, autumn entry. Today, over at Violet's house, I finally saw his photo. That reckless, wild boy who accidentally hit and injured me back then. He's grown so much taller and broader now. Even his baby teeth are all gone. I really wonder if his punches are still just as hard as they were back then. 9th grade. I overheard by sheer chance that he was competing in the school sports day. Violet actually sent me a secret video right from the sidelines. He totally wiped out and tripped during the 100-meter dash. Clumsy, unheard, yet he just wouldn't give up. He got right back up, sprinted with every ounce of his might, and actually took 3rd place. He really is as stubborn as a mule. 10th grade entry. I've made up my mind to apply to the university in the exact same city as him. Unwilling to admit the real reason out loud, I just claimed it was because the local colleges had amazing resources. But deep down, I knew the truth. Going so far away was all just to follow in his footsteps. Freshman year, a fateful reunion at the library. I pretended to flip through a book just to hide my racing heart. He sat so quietly by the window, reading. The exact moment he raised his eyes, met mine, and smiled, my heart rate instantly skyrocketed out of control. Chloe, you just couldn't escape falling for him. Sophomore year date. He actually took the initiative to invite me to a movie, thinking our whole meeting was destiny. Little did he know, those movie seats were a prime spot I had carefully chosen way in advance. Knowing he was afraid of the dark, I knew he'd always prefer a seat near the aisle. Sitting right side by side, our elbows accidentally brushed together. Completely flustered, I nearly knocked over our snacks. But behind that embarrassment, my heart was just bursting with absolute joy. The proposal journal entry faced his third proposal today. I declined the first 2 times entirely on purpose. It had absolutely nothing to do with the size of the wedding ring. I simply hadn't plucked up the courage to lay bare the dark truth of our past. But seeing him kneel on one knee with such an earnest look in his eyes, declaring he would wait up all night if he didn't get an answer, I finally nodded yes. The second we embraced, my tears fell completely out of control. I really thought our paths would never cross again in this lifetime. Yet fate spun in circles, only to tie us tightly back together. The girl he once punched had willingly given him her entire heart. In this twisted game, I have completely lost. The eve of the wedding entry. Tomorrow is our wedding day. After agonizing over it for so long, I finally decided to tell him everything about our past. I've endlessly imagined all kinds of worst-case scenarios for when the truth comes out, terrified that he might be horrified by me. I'd use punishment as a desperate excuse just to stay together, terrified he'd be completely overwhelmed with guilt. I'd spend the rest of my life making up for what he owes me. But my deepest fear is that after learning everything, he might just turn around and walk away forever. The pen had been pressed so incredibly hard, it actually tore right through the paper. Again and again, she had frantically reassured herself that I would never leave her. The final lines were a messy, blurred scribble. The paper itself was stiff, soaked through with her tears. I slowly closed that notebook, clutching the cover so damn tightly that my knuckles turned pure white. My vision slowly blurred behind a thick veil of tears. A sharp, sour ache welled up in my nose, and a heavy choking sensation got completely stuck in my throat. I tried my absolute best to suppress the surging wave of emotions, but scalding tears still dripped down onto the dark blue cover, bleeding into tiny dark spots. Chloe, so it was you. You were the one who had been terrified this whole entire time. Ever since you innocently fell for me at 13, you spent all those long years silently following, just waiting. Back then, you took 3 brutal punches from me for absolutely no reason, and nobody, not a single soul, ever uttered an apology to you. Yet you somehow transformed all that pain into a long, agonizingly deep love. Relying on sheer, unbelievable resilience, you dragged yourself right out of that muddy past, got accepted into a top-tier university, built a massive company with your own 2 hands, and transformed, step by painful step, into the dazzling woman you are today. Your so-called elaborate revenge? It was a complete facade all along. You grew with everything you had, just to rightfully stand by my side. Thinking back to the desperate, anxious questions scribbled in your notebook, it turns out, deep down, you were just petrified that I would walk away. I gently put the notebook back in its exact original place, wiped the heavy tears from my face, and took several deep, shaky breaths to calm my racing heart. I walked slowly over to the bedroom door. Inside, it was dead silent. Instead of rashly throwing the door open, I simply rested my forehead against the freezing wood panel, just standing there quietly for a long, long time. Everything can wait until tomorrow, I whispered into the quiet hallway. The very next morning, I sat out in the living room early, just waiting. That dark blue notebook rested quietly on the coffee table, deliberately placed beside a cup of hot coffee at exactly 105 degrees. The bedroom door slowly creaked open, and Chloe walked out in a loose nightgown, her black hair falling casually, faint little pillow marks still visible on her soft cheek. But as her gaze swept across the table, her footsteps abruptly froze. Her eyes landed first on the steaming coffee cup, before locking dead onto that familiar notebook. All the color violently drained from her face in an instant, her lips losing all their natural warmth. That's right, Chloe. I read it all. Her wide, panicked eyes darted frantically back and forth between the notebook and me. Her trembling fingers repeatedly clutched and released the hem of her nightgown. Those were just random thoughts I wrote down a long time ago. Oh? Even what you wrote the very day before our wedding? I saw every single word, Chloe. Her breathing turned rapid, her chest heaving in panic, as she subconsciously took a half-step backwards. Please, I can explain everything to you. Chloe, there's absolutely no need to explain. I slowly pushed myself up. She scrambled backward, her shoulders hitting the cold wall. Trapped. Nowhere left to run. I took a slow step forward, stopping just 1.5 feet away. She looked up, thick, glistening tears already pooling in her wide eyes. But she bit her lip hard, stubbornly fighting back the urge to let a single drop fall. That fierce, stubborn glare. It was the exact same look that little girl gave me, trapped in the mud all those years ago. Her tiny silhouette perfectly overlapping with the woman standing right in front of me. Do you remember what you wrote on page 47? Her shoulders gave a sudden jerk. That accidental run-in at the library. You pretended to be reading. I looked up and gave you a soft smile. You wrote that your heart hammered so fast you literally forgot how to breathe. Stop, she whispered. But I pushed on. In entry number 103, when I got on one knee to propose, you wrote that you sobbed even harder than I did. Luke, stop it. She cut me off, her voice cracking with raw panic. But I wouldn't stop. I had to pour out every single word burning in my chest. And on the very last page, filled with pure dread, I stepped closer. You were absolutely terrified, desperately trying to convince yourself that I'd never walk away. Tears finally broke free, falling drop by drop onto her collar. She jerked her head away, viciously scrubbing her eyes. Don't look at me, she choked out. But our true feelings? They were already laid bare. There was no way I was ignoring this anymore. I reached out and gently guided her chin back to face me. Her damp eyelashes fluttered. The tip of her nose was bright red, a faint tooth mark denting her lower lip. Chloe, I'm right here. I am never leaving you. That broke her. Her tears flooded down, and she choked back a heavy, desperate sob. Even back then, when you shoved me into the dirt, I didn't back down. This is me we're talking about. I won't leave you. I will never abandon you. I leaned in, pressing my forehead firmly against hers. 6 whole years of living together, side by side, day and night. It was never some twisted revenge plot. The steaming cups of coffee, the gently placed bandages, the way she silently crushed every crisis that came my way from the shadows. Every tiny detail was pure, raw devotion. I told you once that no one gets to mess with you but me. I've locked those words deep in my soul. Back then, I screwed up. I mistakenly threw 3 punches and completely humiliated you in front of everyone. She hummed softly. I brought my hand up, gently cradling her palm, my thumb brushing over that faded, time-worn scar. Every single debt I owe you. I swear I'll pay it back in full, in this life and the next. I want you to let out every ounce of hurt I caused. She stared down at our intertwined fingers, utterly silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, she balled up her fist and softly tapped my chest. 1, another tap. 2, each hit weaker than the one before it. And when the third punch landed, she didn't pull away. Her hand just rested over my heart, feeling the frantic, chaotic pounding in my chest. The debt for those 3 punches, consider it settled. Without wasting another second, I yanked her tight into my embrace. She buried her face deep into the crook of my neck, her frail body shivering. Chloe, I love you so damn much. Ever since we shared that quiet smile in the library back in freshman year, you took root deep inside my soul. She stiffened, a muffled protest coming from my shoulder. You were obviously the one who smiled first, and you fell way harder. You had your hair tucked behind your ear, clutching that heavy textbook. The tiny, subtle curve of your lips when we first locked eyes. I haven't forgotten a single detail to this day. She shyly burrowed her face even deeper into my shirt, the tips of her ears burning a bright cherry red. How do you remember it so perfectly? She mumbled. Because that one look absolutely stole my heart. I've cherished it for 6 long years. She went quiet, melting peacefully into my arms, her index finger tightly gripping the fabric of my shirt. Golden sunlight streamed through the window, spilling across the floorboards and bathing the whole room in a cozy, warm glow. The dancing shadows painted a soft halo around her hair. I rested my chin gently on her head, closing my eyes, finally feeling true, complete peace. 3 months flew by in the blink of an eye. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, the alarm blared to life. I blindly fumbled around the nightstand for my phone, but grabbed empty air. Turns out, the girl sleeping next to me had already killed the alarm. Chloe was on her side, blinking up at me with sleepy, half-lidded eyes. Her messy bedhead splayed all across the pillow. Don't get up yet. she mumbled, her voice thick and gravelly with sleep. What time is it anyway? Just be a good boy, and stay for 5 more minutes. She shifted closer, resting her warm cheek against my bare chest and throwing her arms securely around my waist. Thinking back to just a few months ago, I was stuck shivering on a freezing cold floor, night after miserable night. Life really does flip when you least expect it. Hey, where'd you put that debt settlement list? I asked. I ripped it to shreds ages ago. Wait, when did you do that? The night you snooped through my notebook, she snuggled tighter into my chest, her voice muffled against my skin. It was really just to let me vent anyway. But when you whipped it out back then, you looked so ridiculously serious. Hey, don't make fun of me, I chuckled softly, my fingertips gently dragging through her long hair, about that whole childhood misunderstanding. I never actually got the chance to apologize properly for that, but before I could say another word, her slender finger gently pressed against my lips, hushing me completely. If you say sorry one more time, I'm seriously going to smack you. I wasn't going to apologize, I whispered softly. I just wanted to say, thank you. I gently took her hand, interlacing my fingers tightly with hers. Thank you for surviving the darkness of our past and for never giving up on us. Thank you for crossing over a whole decade just to find your way back to my side, step by step. And most of all, thank you for choosing to spend the rest of your life with me. Her clear eyes met mine, a soft blush spreading across her face. You're so cheesy, especially this early in the morning, she murmured. I'm just being honest. She raised her hand, giving my chest a playful little thump. The strike was incredibly gentle, before she nestled perfectly back into my arms, finally at total peace. From now on, no more bringing up those old stories of me trying to play the hero when we're out, she mumbled. And do not let our parents dig out those embarrassing photo albums again, got it? Whatever you say, boss, I chuckled. Then, after a quiet moment, a tiny, fragile voice broke the silence. Honestly, I've had feelings for you since way before all of that, too. The words were so soft, but they hit me like a truck, carving themselves right into the deepest part of my soul. By 9 o'clock, we were sitting across from each other at the dining table, just soaking in a normal, quiet breakfast. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Brandon, totally roasting me, asking if I was still banished to sleeping on the floor. I glanced up. Chloe was casually sipping from my coffee mug and snatching a piece of bacon right off my plate. Catching me staring, she froze in her tracks. What are you looking at? She snapped. I couldn't help but smile at my wife. The tips of her ears were burning red, even if her mouth was as feisty as ever. Just because we tossed out that stupid contract doesn't mean our daily rules don't count, she warned. We still split the chores, and your paycheck goes straight to me. No slacking. Oh, and when we fight, you have to be the first one to apologize. Done. I smiled easily. No secret dinners or hanging out alone with other girls either. Not a problem. Is yes the only word in your vocabulary? She huffed. I only take orders from you. Blushing harder, she flicked a crumpled napkin right at my head. I caught it effortlessly, a huge, goofy grin spreading across my face. Still smiling, I typed a quick reply back to my buddy. We've been sharing a bed for a long time now, man. I tossed the phone down. The warm morning sun poured through the window, catching the leaves of our houseplants in a shower of golden light. Chloe sat there, admiring the little flower rack she had spent all weekend putting together herself. Catching me staring at her again, she put on her best fake angry glare. Hey, no sneaking peeks at me. It's not sneaking a peek when I'm just admiring my beautiful wife. The corners of my mouth curled up into an unstoppable smile. A quiet, perfect sweetness was filling every single moment of our new life together.